Jean Bart was a swift French battleship and the last of the Richelieu-class. Designed to counter the Italian Littorio-class, the Richelieu ships followed the Dunkirk-class layout, grouping their main guns in two quadruple turrets at the front. This design was scaled up to include 8 15-inch guns, compared to the 13-inch guns on the Dunkirk, with added armor for protection against similar caliber weapons. Construction began in 1936, and she was launched in 1940, shortly after World War II started in Europe. By the time Germany won the Battle of France, Jean Bart was incomplete and hastily moved to Casablanca to avoid capture, equipped with just one main turret and a few anti-aircraft guns. In Casablanca, efforts were made to ready Jean Bart for combat despite limited resources. Over time, her anti-aircraft defenses were gradually improved, and in 1942, a search radar was installed. When American and British forces launched Operation Torch in November, Jean Bart defended against the attack, engaging the USS Massachusetts in a gunnery duel but suffering heavy damage from American dive bombers. After French forces in the region joined the Allies, there were attempts to complete Jean Bart in the United States. However, the U.S. Navy declined the project, leading to her repair in Casablanca and subsequent use as a training ship for the rest of the war. In 1945, the future of Jean Bart was debated, considering options like converting her into an aircraft carrier, completing her as a battleship, or scrapping her. The decision was made to finish her as a battleship, which took several years. By 1955, she was fully operational and embarked on cruises to Denmark and the United States. On January 30, 1956, Jean Bart and Richelieu sailed together for the first and only time. Later that year, Jean Bart participated in the French intervention during the Suez Crisis, firing briefly on Port Said. By August 1957, she was placed in reserve and served as a barracks ship until 1961. Jean Bart remained unused in the French Navy until she was removed from the Naval Register in 1970 and sold for scrap. Design. When Italy revealed plans in 1934 to construct 2 Littorio-class battleships armed with 15-inch guns, the French Navy quickly responded by starting to design their own powerful ships. They used the Dunkirk-class battleships as a base, needing to scale up the design to match the new Italian ships in both firepower and protection. The designers considered using 16-inch guns, but they had to abandon this idea to comply with the Washington Naval Treaty's 35,000-ton limit. Instead, they chose a similar layout to the Dunkirks, with 2 quadruple-gun turrets at the front. Jean Bart, the result of this design effort, weighed 37,250 tons standard and 43,992 tons fully loaded. The ship was 813 feet 2 inches long, with a beam of 108 feet 6 inches and a maximum draft of 32 feet 6 inches. 4 Parsons-geared steam turbines and 6 oil-fired Searle water tube boilers powered the ship, producing a total of 155,000 horsepower. This allowed for a top speed of 32 knots. At a cruising speed of 15 knots, Jean Bart could travel 9,500 nautical miles. The ship had a crew of 1,569 officers and men and carried 4 Loire 130 seaplanes on the fantail, equipped with a steam catapult and crane for handling the aircraft. The ship's main armament included 8 15-inch guns arranged in 2 quadruple turrets at the front. Her secondary armament featured 9 6-inch guns in 3 triple turrets on the rear superstructure. For anti-aircraft defense, Jean Bart was equipped with 12 3.9-inch guns in twin turrets, 8 1.5-inch guns in twin mounts, and 20 0.52-inch machine guns in various mounts. The belt armor was 13 inches thick amidships, while the main battery turrets had 17 inches of armor on their faces. The main armored deck was 6.7 inches thick, and the conning tower had 13-inch thick sides. Service history. Construction and escape to Casablanca. In 1936, the French Navy awarded the contract for Jean Bart to the Chantiers de Pen-Hoël shipyard in Saint-Nazaire. However, due to a busy schedule with the Dunkirk-class battleship Strasbourg, the construction was subcontracted to the nearby AC Loire shipyard. The keel for Jean Bart was laid down on December 12, mere weeks before the Washington Naval Treaty expired. This treaty had restricted France to building only 70,000 tons of battleships over a decade. Yet, with the construction of the 2 Richelieu-class ships and 2 Dunkirk-class ships, France exceeded this limit, totaling 123,000 tons. France justified this by citing the Anglo-German Naval Agreement of 1935, which Britain had signed with Nazi Germany, effectively nullifying the naval disarmament clauses of the Treaty of Versailles. Despite this justification, the work on Jean Bart initially proceeded slowly due to a shortage of dockyard workers and the need to complete the Strasbourg. The dry dock used for Jean Bart's construction was AC Loire's newly completed Cocteau dock, named after its designer, Albert Cocteau, though commonly referred to as the Jean Bart dock. Rising tensions with Germany in early 1939, leading to the invasion of Poland and the outbreak of World War II, placed greater urgency on completing Jean Bart. Jean Bart was launched on March 6, 1940. However, as German forces quickly advanced during the Battle of France in May, it became clear that the usual fitting out process would need to be expedited to move the ship from the port. A team of 3,500 workers accelerated work on the propulsion system, installing 3 boilers, 2 sets of turbines, 2 turbo generators, and 2 pumps within a month. By mid-June, the ship's rudder and anchor chains were in place, and her double bottom was sealed. Her forward main battery turret was equipped with guns and armor but lacked essential shell handling and fire control systems. The superfiring turret had neither guns nor armor, and the secondary turrets were not installed. Improvised installations included 2 twin-mount 3.5-inch anti-aircraft guns from the net layer Gladiateur, 3 37mm guns, and 6 13.2mm mounts, providing minimal defense. Captain Pierre-Jean Ronarc'h, the ship's commander, received orders on June 11 to depart for Casablanca in French Morocco as soon as possible. He planned to leave on June 19, taking advantage of the tides. On that morning, Jean Bart was towed out of the fitting-out dock by 3 tugboats at 3:30 a.m. In the darkness, the ship grounded temporarily, bending one of her screw blades, but the tugs freed her, and by 4:45 a.m., her engines were running. Shortly after, 3 German Heinkel He-111 bombers attacked, with 1 bomb hitting between the main turrets but causing insignificant damage. Jean Bart increased speed to 12 knots and at 6:30 a.m., met the destroyers Le Hardy and Mamelouk, which escorted her to Casablanca. The British destroyer HMS Vanquisher and 2 tugs offered assistance, but Ronarc'h declined. After refueling at sea, Jean Bart continued with the 2 destroyers, arriving in Casablanca at 5 p.m. on June 22. In Casablanca, the focus was on making Jean Bart as ready for action as possible with limited resources. Workers installed more anti-aircraft guns and even fitted a search radar by 1942. The ship's journey to Casablanca was crucial in preserving her for future use, despite the incomplete state in which she escaped. Her story of resilience and strategic importance highlights the challenges faced by the French Navy during a turbulent period. At Casablanca. When Jean Bart arrived in Casablanca, most of her anti-aircraft guns were removed to strengthen the port's defenses. The 90mm and 37mm guns were placed on the jetties guarding the harbor, and 2 of the 6 13.2mm guns were mounted on trucks. After the French defeat in the Battle of France, they signed the armistice on June 22, 1940, ending their participation in the conflict. During peace negotiations, the French suggested neutralizing Jean Bart and other ships in Oran, Algeria. However, they ultimately agreed to demobilize Jean Bart and Richelieu in Toulon. The Germans blocked this move, fearing British intervention. The British, mistakenly believing the Germans wanted to seize the French fleet, launched Operation Catapult to neutralize French warships. In response to these attacks, Captain Ronarc'h took measures to protect Jean Bart. He ordered the open barbets for the secondary turrets and the incomplete superfiring turret to be covered with concrete and sealed much of the hull. On August 11, he moved the ship to shallow water. 11 days later, Captain Émile Barthez took over from Ronarc'h. By September, efforts to prepare the ship for combat with limited resources in Casablanca had begun. On September 7, the ship received 16 13.2mm guns and 17 8mm machine guns, though only one of the latter was installed due to their limited effectiveness. In 1941, an improvised director was created using a torpedo tube platform from the old destroyer on Senigabolda as a base for a 46-feet rangefinder. For navigation, a 9.8-feet rangefinder was installed on the conning tower, with 2 more added to the bridge wings in October. In April 1942, Jean Bart's anti-aircraft battery was further strengthened with 4 37mm guns in single mounts and a pair of new twin 90mm guns. By May, the forward main battery turret was fully operational, and on May 19, Jean Bart conducted test firing. Although the makeshift director was not particularly effective, a triangulation system with observers on board and at 2 points onshore directed the ship's guns. In June, 4 37mm twin-mounted guns and another pair of 90mm twin mounts were installed, replacing 3 of the 4 37mm single guns. A DEM radar was installed, and by October 6, it was operational, capable of detecting aircraft up to 43 miles away. However, its ability to detect surface ships was untested due to the cluttered harbor surroundings. In early November, Jean Bart received a 5th 90mm twin mount, with a 6th planned. At that time, her anti-aircraft battery included 5 90mm twin mounts, 5 37mm guns, 2 in twin mounts and 1 single, 18 13.2mm guns, 2 twin mounts and 14 singles, and 1 8mm machine gun. Despite these efforts, Jean Bart remained incomplete, reflecting the challenges faced by the French Navy during this turbulent period. The ship's journey and subsequent preparations in Casablanca highlight the strategic importance and resilience of Jean Bart amidst the backdrop of World War II. Operation Torch. On November 8, American and British forces launched Operation Torch, aiming to invade French North Africa. The American covering force included the battleship Massachusetts, armed with 9 16-inch guns, the aircraft carriers Ranger and Sewanee, and 3 heavy cruisers. They led the invasion fleet, landing near Casablanca, hoping the French defenders would quickly surrender and join the Free French. At 7 a.m., a French reconnaissance aircraft spotted the fleet. To counter the landing, the French had 1 light cruiser, 9 destroyers, several submarines, the coastal battery at El Hank, and Jean Bart, intended as a floating battery. Before the French ships could effectively respond, Massachusetts and the heavy cruisers Tuscaloosa and Wichita started bombarding the port. Simultaneously, SBD Dauntless dive bombers from Ranger attacked the harbor with 500-pound bombs. Jean Bart was hit twice at 7:18 a.m. The first bomb damaged the port catapult, started a fire, and flooded the manual steering compartment. The second bomb struck the key and exploded, deforming the starboard hull plating. Jean Bart retaliated with 4 two-gun salvos between 7:08 and 7:19 a.m. When the French cruiser and destroyers attempted to sortie, they laid a smoke screen that obscured the American cruisers. At 7:25 a.m., Massachusetts engaged Jean Bart, scoring a hit that penetrated both of Jean Bart's armor decks and exploded in the empty magazines meant for the 6-inch guns. Another salvo hit near the bow at 7:35 a.m., deforming the hull plating. A shell struck the key at 7:36 a.m., causing concrete fragments to injure anti-aircraft gunners and further flooding. At 7:37 a.m., another 16-inch shell hit the ship, passing through the funnel and striking the edge of the armor deck. One more shell struck the quarterdeck at 8:10 a.m., penetrating the sloped armor deck and exploding in the ballast compartment, causing additional flooding in the steering compartment. Despite these numerous hits, Jean Bart was not critically damaged, although the Americans did not know this. Workers quickly removed the deformed steel that had jammed the main battery turret, which was operational again by 5:24 p.m. Only one of the 16-inch shells had posed a serious threat. If it had exploded in the 6-inch magazine, it could have destroyed the ship. The next day, Jean Bart's 90mm guns fired on advancing ground troops. On November 10, Jean Bart's forward turret engaged the heavy cruiser Augusta between 11:41 and 11:51 a.m., nearly hitting it with her second salvo. 3 of her 9 two-gun salvos straddled Augusta, forcing the cruiser to withdraw and prompting Ranger to launch another airstrike on Jean Bart. At 3 p.m., 9 Dauntlesses armed with 1,000-pound bombs and 8 F-4F Wildcat fighters attacked Jean Bart. The fighters strafed her anti-aircraft batteries to suppress them during the Dauntless attacks. 2 of the bombers scored hits. The first caused extensive damage to the forecastle, and the second destroyed a significant part of the hull toward the stern. These bombs caused serious fires that were extinguished by 8 p.m. Extensive flooding led Jean Bart to settle by the stern, submerging the turbo generator room. The bomb explosions also disabled the main diesel generators, leaving only the backup diesels for power. Throughout the engagements with American forces, Jean Bart lost 22 men, with another 22 wounded. Despite firing only 25 shells from her main battery and suffering significant damage on November 10, her turret remained operational, as did the 90mm guns, although both batteries were without power. Jean Bart's resilience during Operation Torch showcased the ship's strength and the crew's determination. Even with limited resources and significant damage, they managed to keep the ship in fighting condition, highlighting the strategic importance and bravery involved in the battle for French North Africa. With the Free French. After French forces in North Africa signed an armistice on November 11, the Germans quickly invaded the rest of Vichy France. This prompted François Darlan, the former chief of staff of the French Navy, to defect to the Allies along with the rest of the fleet. Repair work to make Jean Bart seaworthy had already begun on the same day. By February 15, 1943, the outboard turbines were operational, and manual steering controls had been repaired. Admiral Raymond Fenard, head of the French naval mission to the U.S., requested that the U.S. Navy take Jean Bart to the United States for repairs and completion, similar to what had been done with Richelieu. On April 15, Fenard issued a report to the U.S. Vice Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Frederick J. Horn, detailing the status of Jean Bart. However, Horn replied on May 1 that the ship could not be completed to its original specifications. On May 6, the U.S. Navy agreed to take the ship in September, which required repairs to the steering motors. The Free French Service Central des Constructions et Armes Navales, Central Naval Technical Department, proposed two plans to complete Jean Bart with minimal changes. Both plans involved replacing the 15-inch guns with 13-inch guns from the old battleship Lorraine, as Jean Bart's guns were needed to replace the damaged ones on Richelieu. The first plan included modifying the quarterdeck to carry two large catapults capable of launching American TBF Avenger or British Fairey Barracuda torpedo bombers and F-6F Hellcat or Supermarine Seafire fighters, totaling 6 aircraft. It also proposed installing 35-inch dual-purpose guns in 15 twin turrets, along with 64 Bofors 40mm guns in quadruple mounts and 50 20mm Oerlikon cannons. New fire control equipment, including US-built directors and Mk4 fire control radar, was also suggested. The second, less ambitious plan abandoned the aircraft facilities in favor of 17 twin 5-inch turrets, increasing the 40mm battery to 20 quadruple mounts. On August 18, Horn rejected both proposals. Fenard then proposed converting Jean Bart into an aircraft carrier, which Horn also declined. On December 8, Fenard appealed directly to Horn's superior, Admiral Ernest King, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Fleet and Chief of Naval Operations. In March 1944, King informed Fenard that the U.S. Navy had no interest in diverting critical wartime resources to complete Jean Bart. By then, the U.S. Navy had enough battleships and aircraft carriers and could not easily reproduce the parts needed to complete Jean Bart. They had only agreed to repair and modernize Richelieu, which was in a more complete state, after significant pressure from Britain. Consequently, Jean Bart remained in Casablanca, where Free French authorities prepared the ship for sea. Options to complete Jean Bart without U.S. assistance were limited. The scuttling of the French fleet in Toulon in November 1942 had damaged many shipyard facilities, and Brest would not be liberated until September 1944. The French inquired about taking Jean Bart to Gibraltar, but the shipyard there was overwhelmed with more critical projects. Nevertheless, shipyard workers in Casablanca readied Jean Bart for sea trials by September 1943. During these trials, she was accompanied by the destroyers Basque and La Fortuné and 3 U.S. destroyers. Despite her hull being deformed from the damage incurred during Operation Torch and not cleaned of biofouling, Jean Bart reached a speed of 22.5 knots. For the rest of the war, the vessel served as a training ship. Completion. As World War II neared its end in early 1945, the French Naval Command started planning for their post-war fleet. On February 22, they decided to complete Jean Bart, but they couldn't agree on the ship's final form. One faction, including Fenard and Admirals Pierre Barjot and Louis Kahn, the chief of naval construction, pushed for converting Jean Bart into an aircraft carrier. Others argued for finishing it as a battleship, while a third group suggested scrapping the ship and redirecting efforts to other projects. In July, Kahn proposed a plan to transform the ship into a carrier with a capacity for 40 aircraft, plus 14 spares, armed with 16 5.1-inch anti-aircraft guns in twin mounts and protected by a 90mm thick armored flight deck. This ambitious project, costing 5 billion francs and taking 5 years to complete, faced substantial opposition, notably from Fenard, due to its high cost and limited aircraft capacity compared to American and British carriers of the time. With the ship's fate still uncertain, Jean Bart departed Casablanca on August 25, arriving in Cherbourg 4 days later. On September 21, during a naval command meeting, they decided against scrapping the vessel. Given the objections to converting it into an aircraft carrier, the construction department estimated the time required to manufacture the necessary 15-inch gun barrels, rebuild the superfiring turret, and stockpile munitions. They projected it would take 4 years to complete the vessel and another year to produce the shells and charges. Ultimately, they chose to finish Jean Bart similarly to Richelieu but with enhanced anti-aircraft defenses. Naval historians John Jordan and Robert Dumas noted that the decision against a carrier conversion was prudent, as it would have resulted in a ship that offered poor value for the investment and effort involved. Jean Bart was then moved to Brest, entering dry dock for hull repairs on March 11, 1946. During this period, her propulsion system was completed, her main and secondary turrets were installed, and her superstructure was modified to accommodate new radar and fire control equipment. Hull repairs were finished on November 26, 1947, allowing her to move from the dry dock to the fitting-out quay. Additional modifications were made to the superstructure, and the guns for her primary and secondary turrets were installed. Another stint in dry dock followed from March 20 to October 9, 1948, during which bulges were added to the lower hull and her propeller shafts were repaired. Initial testing of her propulsion machinery began on December 4, followed by full tests in January 1949. She then conducted gunnery tests and was assigned to the Group des Bâtiments de Ligne battleship group, with Richelieu in May, although the unit was disbanded in 1950. Post-war active service. In May and June 1950, Jean Bart joined the fleet off North Africa for training exercises. She then spent several months in Brest before resuming initial training in early 1951. In May, she visited Le Havre to have a degaussing system installed, followed by more training cruises and fuel consumption tests in June. By July 7, she was back at the fitting out quay in Brest for additional work. At this point, her main and secondary batteries were operational, and her propulsion system was complete, though her anti-aircraft battery and fire control equipment were still missing. Starting in November, the shipyard began the next phase of modernization, which included installing anti-aircraft guns, modifying the 6-inch turrets to dual purpose, and fitting fire control equipment. The new anti-aircraft battery featured 24 4-inch guns in twin mounts and 28 2.2-inch Bofors guns. Meanwhile, her main battery turrets were deactivated for preservation. Progress on the ship's anti-aircraft battery was slow. The 4-inch guns were installed by mid-1952, but the directors for these guns weren't added until May 1953, allowing test firings in July. These tests showed that extensive modifications were needed, finally completed in October 1954. The 2.2-inch guns were even more delayed, not ready for tests until September 1955, and their optical directors weren't fitted until August 1956. Between 1951 and 1956, numerous sea trials were conducted to evaluate the ship as each new type of equipment was installed. By the time the work was finished, Jean Bart was equipped with various radar sets, including DRBV-11 for air/surface search, DRBV-20 for air search, and DRBV-30 for navigation. Fire control radars included DRBC-10A for the main battery, 6 IKI sets for the heavy anti-aircraft battery, and 5 DRBC-30B sets for the light anti-aircraft guns. Her normal displacement had increased to 43,052 tons, with a full load displacement of 49,196 tons. The ship's draft also increased to 36 feet. In May 1955, Jean Bart was declared complete. That month, she took President René Coty on a visit to Denmark, escorted by the destroyer Surcouf. After returning, she left in July to represent France at a celebration in New York for the 175th anniversary of the French soldiers' landing led by the Comte de Rochambeau during the American Revolutionary War. She then conducted training cruises off Brittany in August and September before heading to the Mediterranean in October. Jean Bart arrived in Toulon on October 17 and replaced Richelieu as the flagship of the training squadron 4 days later. Jean Bart spent late 1955 and early 1956 in port and conducting gunnery training in Les Salons d'Hiers. On January 30, 1956, for the first and only time, Richelieu and Jean Bart cruised together. In June 1956, Jean Bart toured French North Africa. As tensions with Egypt over the Suez Canal escalated, the decision was made on July 8 to deploy her to Egypt. Jean Bart's super-firing turret was reactivated in August, and on September 7, she conducted shooting practice with the cruiser Georges Leg off the North African coast. Jean Bart then joined the French Naval Intervention Force during the Suez Crisis, known as Operation Mousquet Air. She only had her super-firing turret in operation. During the operations off the Canal Zone, she had a complement of 1,280 officers and men, though her projected wartime crew was 2,220. This meant only half of her anti-aircraft guns could be manned. The ship left Toulon on October 26, stopping first in Algiers, French Algeria, where from October 29 to 31, the 1st Foreign Parachute Regiment and Commando Hubert Frogman Unit came aboard. Jean Bart then joined the intervention force, which included the carriers Armanche and Lafayette, the cruiser Georges Leg, the destroyers Surcouf, Coeur Saint, Cassar, and Bouvet, and an anti-submarine warfare group. They left on November 1, reaching Limassol, Cyprus, on the 4th, where the paratroopers and frogmen transferred to amphibious assault ships. On November 5, Jean Bart steamed south to bombard Port Said but only fired 4 rounds before the landing was cancelled. She remained off the city for 2 more days before departing on the 7th and returning to Toulon via Limassol on November 13. On December 1, Jean Bart returned to the training squadron. Her last sea voyage occurred from July 11 to 1957, which was also the last time she fired her main battery. On August 1, she was reduced to reserve status. Many in the Naval Command were reluctant to see the funds and effort expended in completing the ship go to waste. However, a new generation of post-war cruisers and destroyers was entering service, leading to significant crew shortages. The cost of maintaining Jean Bart, coupled with the need to release manpower for more useful vessels, led to her withdrawal from active service after just 2 years. The Navy considered modernization proposals to improve her anti-aircraft battery or add guided missiles. One concept involved adding missile launchers with 24 to 44 missiles to the quarterdeck, while another involved removing the main battery turrets and reconstructing the forward part of the ship to house a large missile battery with up to 325 missiles. Another proposal was an air defense missile armament for testing purposes, replacing the centerline 6-inch turret with a launcher for the American RIM 2 Terrier missile. The 6-inch turret would be reinstalled after the evaluation period. None of these modernization or conversion projects came to fruition, and proposals to remove the 15-inch turrets weren't seriously considered by the High Command. In August 1957, Jean Bart was reduced to a barracks ship, and on January 1, 1961, her reserve status was downgraded. There was some consideration in 1964 to reactivate her for use as a command ship during nuclear experiments in the Pacific Ocean, but the cost was deemed too high, so the cruiser de Grasse was used instead. Jean Bart remained laid up until February 10, 1970, when she was struck from the Naval Register, renamed Q-466, and put up for sale. She was sold to shipbreakers on May 21, towed to Bray Galen, and dismantled for scrap. Although she never became fully operational, Jean Bart proved to be a valuable test bed for various new French anti-aircraft guns and radars. Jean Bart's journey, from her rushed construction during the chaos of World War II to her final days as a test bed and barracks ship, reflects the turbulent times she was built for. Though she never saw full operational service, her story is a testament to the resilience and ingenuity of the French Navy. Jean Bart's legacy lives on in the advancements she helped pioneer in naval technology and the memories of those who served aboard her. As she was dismantled for scrap in 1970, Jean Bart's contributions to naval history were solidified, marking the end of an era for the iconic Richelieu-class battleships.